Welcome back to the deep dive. We are here to cut through all the noise and give you that shortcut to expertise.
And today we're tackling a really common source of misery, nausea, and vomiting.
We're jumping into the pharmacology of antiemetic agents. The mission today is to really understand how the body's emetic reflex is controlled.
And, more importantly, to flag those clinical pitfalls and the really high-yield safety facts that you absolutely have to know.
So where do we even start? This is such a huge topic.
Well, the thing about nausea and vomiting is that the triggers are just so diverse. It's a really complex reflex.
You mean like motion sickness versus something you ate?
Exactly. You could be triggering it chemically with toxins in your blood or mechanically from, say, vestibular input that causes vertigo.
Or even just locally, right, in the GI tract.
Right. And the command center for all of this is a place in the medulla called the chemoreceptor trigger zone, the CTZ.
Wow, CTZ.
The CTZ. So an antiemetic, the drugs we're talking about today, is what we use to block the CTZ's response to all those different signals.
Okay, let's unpack this. But before we get to blocking the reflex, we should probably talk about inducing it.
The emetic side of things, yeah.
Because there's been a really significant, life-saving shift in the guidings here that we have to talk about.
You're talking about Ipecac Syrup.
Exactly.
For decades, it was just standard. You kept it in the medicine cabinet for, accidental poisonings.
I remember seeing it at home.
Most people do.
Yeah.
But since 2003, the official advice is to actively not use it at home. In fact, you should dispose of any bottles you might have.
So what happened? What was the big change? Was it just not working?
It was actually worse than just not working.
Yeah.
The evidence showed it almost never fully emptied the stomach.
Oh, wow.
And the really critical finding was that forcing a patient to vomit could be far, far more toxic than the poison they actually swallowed.
How so?
Well, think about what they might have ingested. If it's something corrosive, like a strong acid, or even something like kerosene, Ipecac makes that substance burn the esophagus a second time, once on the way down and again on the way up.
And the risk of aspiration pneumonia there must be huge, which can be fatal.
It is. The risk of inducing a life-threatening aspiration event it completely outweighed any potential benefit.
So the guidelines shifted completely to prevention.
Completely. Lock up poisons, never transfer things to, old soda bottles or whatever, and post that poison control number everywhere. It's 1-800-222-1222.
A crucial piece of public health information. Okay, so let's get to the other side of this. When the reflex is firing and we don't want it to.
Which is most of the time in a clinical setting, right? Post-op chemotherapy.
Right. So we turn to antiemetics. And they work in, two main ways?
Broadly speaking, yes. For really mild nausea, sometimes you can get away with something that's locally acting.
Like an antacid.
An antacid, a local anesthetic, something that just kind of calms the GI lining. But for anything significant, we go for the centrally acting agents.
And these are the heavy hitters.
These are the ones that directly block the CTZ or the vomiting center itself. And they fall into about 5 major drug classes.
But before we get into the classes, it's really interesting how pharmacologists are now combining these different mechanisms.
Oh, they're getting very clever about it. They're leveraging different pathways. Take a drug like Declegis.
Okay.
It's a combination of doxylamine succinate, which is an antihistamine and pyridoxine, which is just vitamin B6.
And that's specifically for pregnancy?
It is the only drug specifically approved for nausea and vomiting in pregnancy, but only after non-drug measures haven't worked. It's very targeted.
And then you have something like Akynzeo. That one's a combo, too.
Right. That one combines natupitant, which is an NK1 antagonist, with palonosetron, a 5-HT3 blocker.
And why that specific combination?
It's just a masterclass in treating chemotherapy-induced nausea. See, with chemo, you have 2 different risks.
Okay.
There's acute nausea, which happens in the first 24 hours, and then delayed nausea, which can hit 1 to 5 days later. The 5-HT3 blocker, the palonosetron, is great for that acute phase. But the NK1 antagonist, the natupitant, that's what's crucial for managing that delayed response. You hit both pathways, you get much better protection.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, let's dive into those core centrally acting groups, starting with the phenothiazines.
Prochlorperazine is our prototype here.
And these are kind of the workhorses.
They really are. They work by changing the responsiveness of the CTZ in the medulla. We use them for severe vomiting, for nausea after anesthesia.
And that one really miserable condition.
Oh, intractable hiccoughs, yes.
Yeah.
Those relentless spasms that just will not stop. They can be a lifesaver there.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because their side effect profile is Well, it requires a lot of caution, especially one specific reaction.
You're right. When you think phenothiazines, you must immediately think photosensitivity. It's not just a minor rash. It can be a severe adverse reaction.
So patients need serious counseling on this.
Absolutely. Heavy sunscreen, protective clothing, even on an overcast day. It's
Yeah.
a non-negotiable safety point.
They also have that other strange but harmless side effect.
Yes, and you have to warn patients about this, or they'll panic. Their urine might turn a pink or even a red-brown color.
Not blood.
Not blood, it's just a cosmetic drug effect. And then, of course, you get the more expected things: drowsiness, dizziness, dry mouth, urinary retention.
Got it. Okay, moving on to the nonphenothiazine category, which is basically just one drug, right?
It is. We're really just talking about metoclopramide, or Reglan.
Metoclopramide is so versatile.
It is. It reduces the CTZ's responsiveness, but it also increases GI motility. So it's not just for chemo-induced nausea.
It's also famous for gastroparesis.
Exactly. For when the stomach empties too slowly, it has that dual action.
Okay, what's the big red flag we have to monitor for with metoclopramide? The one we can't miss.
The clinical gravity here is the risk of extrapyramidal symptoms, EPS.
So not just drowsiness.
No, not at all. We're talking about potentially severe movement disorders, involuntary muscle contractions, tremors. Because this risk exists and the drug is used so often, you just have to be incredibly vigilant.
Let's shift to the 5-HT3 receptor blockers. This includes ondansetron, zofrangranicetron, and palonosetron. These are everywhere.
They are hugely popular, and for good reason. They block the 5-HT3 receptors in the CTZ and also locally.
And that targeted mechanism makes them a go-to for.
For the most common scenarios: antidiaplastic chemotherapy, radiation therapy, and post-operative nausea and vomiting.
And people prefer them because they don't have that same EPS risk.
That's a big part of it. You avoid the severe EPS risk of metoclopramide, and you avoid the photosensitivity of the phenothiazines. It's often a safer profile.
And there's a big win for pediatrics in this class, too.
Yes, palonosetron stands out here. It's approved for use in children as young as 1 month old.
And the side effects are generally milder.
Generally, yeah. Things like headache, dizziness, maybe some constipation or muscle pain, usually more manageable.
Okay, next up, a newer class. The substance Neurokinin-1 receptor antagonists. The main one is aprepitant, or Amend.
This class acts directly in the CNS. They block those PNK1 receptors. They're very powerful.
But not used as a first-line therapy.
No, you'll almost always see them used in combination with other antiemetics. They are reserved for managing nausea from highly emetogenic chemotherapy.
Like cisplatin therapy.
Exactly, the really tough cases.
And this is where we have to get really, really careful with drug interactions.
This is a high-stakes area, a huge teaching point.
Yeah.
If you combine aprepitant with drugs like pimozide or thioridazine, you can get dangerously high serum levels of those other drugs.
So that's a hard stop. Just avoid it.
Avoid it completely.
Mm.
But then there are the more common interactions.
Or those.
It can decrease the effectiveness of hormonal contraceptives.
Oh, that's a big one.
A very big one.
Mm.
Patients need to be counseled to use an alternative barrier method, and it also decreases the effectiveness of warfarin.
So you have to watch their anticoagulation levels like a hawk.
Constantly. It requires incredibly close monitoring and coordination across the whole healthcare team.
Okay, let's wrap up the drug classes with that miscellaneous agents group.
A few unique ones here. We have to mention dronabinol. That's marinol and nabilone, which is Sesamet.
These have cannabis ingredients?
They do. They're controlled substances, C3 and C2, and they are only approved as a last resort.
For what specifically?
For chemo-induced nausea and vomiting that hasn't responded to any other treatment. And their CNS effects mean you need really close supervision.
Is there a less sedating option in this group?
There is. Trimethylbenzamide, or Tigan. It's often the drug of choice when you really want to minimize sedation.
Yeah.
And its versatile oral, parenteral, and suppository forms are available.
And hydroxyzine, Visceral.
Also in this group, you'll see that used a lot pre- or post-operatively, even in obstetrical delivery.
Okay, let's pivot now to the practice side of things. The nursing considerations across the lifespan are so important with these drugs.
Absolutely, because the danger really shifts depending on the patient's age.
So for children?
With children, you use extreme caution. They're much more susceptible to the CNS side effects, and maybe more importantly, to the fluid and electrolyte imbalances from the vomiting itself.
So what's preferred?
Prochlorperazine is sometimes used, but the 5-HT3 agents are really common because of that more targeted mechanism we talked about.
And then at the other end of the spectrum are older adults.
Older adults are a huge priority concern.
Yeah.
They're far more likely to experience, well, all of the adverse effects.
The sedation, confusion.
Sedation, confusion, dizziness, the cardiovascular effects. And because of age-related changes, their kidney and liver function might be impaired.
So you always have to start low and go slow.
Always. You start with a lower dose and you titrate very carefully. And you have to have enhanced fall and safety precautions in place.
So if you had to boil it down, what are the 3 absolute non-negotiable nursing points for these drugs?
Okay, 3 things. First, your baseline assessment. You need to know their neurostatus, their blood pressure, including orthostatic checks, and their baseline liver and kidney function. Implementation is all about safety. With the CNS depression, assistance with walking is mandatory, and you have to be treating the dehydration.
And finally, teaching.
Teaching has to cover those unique risks. Change positions slowly, strictly avoid alcohol or other CNS depressants, and report signs of photosensitivity or those EPS symptoms immediately.
This has been such a high-yield deep dive. To really distill this for everyone listening, remember that Antiemetics works centrally on the CTZ.
And the main clinical choice often comes down to managing risk.
If it's a phenothiazine, you're worried about photosensitivity. If it's metoclopramide,
You're monitoring for EPS. Exactly.
and if we connect this to the bigger picture,
The challenge is always managing that trade-off between comfort and consciousness.
Yeah.
We need the patient to stop vomiting, but almost all the really effective drugs cause some level of CNS depression.
that strong sedation component just seems unavoidable.
It is. From the phenothiazines all the way to the cannabinoids, they all alter mental status.
Which brings up a really interesting clinical question.
And this is something for you to think about. If you have a post-op patient and you need them to be clear-headed and mobilizing quickly for a safe discharge, but they have severe nausea.
So you have these competing priorities.
Exactly. How does that pervasive risk of CNS depression from the Antiemetics complicate your decision? Do you treat the nausea aggressively,
Right.
or do you prioritize a faster functional recovery?
A tough clinical balancing act. A great thought to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into antiemetic agents.